Hi, this is Larry Castle here with Ken Brown for episode 98 of That's a Good Question. What do we know about the January 6th attack on our Capitol? Welcome back to That's a Good Question, and thanks for joining us this week. Last week, we talked about the question, how should Christians view the January 6th investigation? Mm-hmm. And we made the case that the chaos that was unleashed that day and the mayhem that surely would have followed had some key people not stood up to that lie that the election had been stolen and stood up to the very real attempt to actually steal the election by throwing it back to the states. That we made the case that none of this is good for the country, and more importantly for us two pastors, that this is not good for our mission.
Correct.
So we, as we said, we pray for those in governmental authority, so that as in 1 Timothy 2, we might live quiet and peaceable lives as we seek to win people for Christ.
Right.
So today we're going to have somewhat of a shorter episode, and shorter than last week's at least. Last week's was pretty long, longer than usual. But our point today is to point our listeners to give a little bit of new information and point them to our podcast that we recorded just after the events of January 6th, after that riot occurred. And again, this week, before we get to that, there have been some new developments that sets up this episode and the episode we're going to show them. We're going to point them to at the end. So let's take a few minutes for you to bring us up to speed.
Well, last week, our podcast was only 2 days after the eighth and the final summer hearing that the House Select Committee investigating January 6th held. So that was on a Thursday night, and our podcasts release every Saturday. Now, I said the final summer hearing because there are going to be others in the fall as well, but so far none of those have been scheduled. And we talked about the fact that the committee is the result of Republicans declining to form a bipartisan blue ribbon panel like 9/11, for example, which would have been made up of panel members outside of Congress. And the Republicans rejected that. And then when given the opportunity to choose Republican members for the committee, they tried to put members on it like Jim Jordan and Jim Banks, who themselves were involved in the events of that day, and so have a conflict of interest. So if Republicans do not like the composition of the committee, they honestly have no one to blame but themselves. Even Trump has criticized the Republican leadership in the Congress, Kevin McCarthy in particular, the minority leader of the House of Representatives, for refusing to participate. Now, this committee, as it is constituted, for the reason I gave, has uncovered details that are damning regarding a broad effort to overturn an election with a multi-pronged attack that we summarized in last week's episode. The multiple prongs included sowing chaos by making unsubstantiated claims of a stolen election, getting people riled up because many people think this way. They think where there's smoke, there has to be fire. And if even half of what's alleged is true, then people think, not unreasonably, we have a big problem. But alas, what was alleged was made up. It was not true. It was debunked by Trump's own Attorney General, Bill Barr, by countless other aides of his who have also, like Barr, testified before the committee to say that we told him that there was no substance to these claims. On one occasion, Trump told his officials that all you need to do is say that there are questions. All I want you to do is say that there are. And then you can leave it to me and he said, the R congressman, the letter R, the Republican congressman, will take care of the rest. Think about that. Now, they refused to. So he kept people like Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell and Michael Flynn and Mike Lindell around, who propagated grand conspiracies about voting machines being manipulated by Venezuela, by Italy, manipulating via a certain type and brand of, wait for it, thermostat. No kidding. I mean, really nothing was too far-fetched to claim and throw out there. But the courts, one after one, dismissed these claims, and Giuliani's law license has been suspended. Sidney Powell's is under review. In her defense in court, remember this? She said, look, no reasonable person would have believed the claims that I was making were actually real. Wow. Having failed in court after court, the committee has shown Trump's attempt to steal the election moved to the states and their legislatures, and an attempt to create Trump electors to send to Washington in mid-December to say they are the real electors from battleground states like, say, Michigan, our own state. In our own state, people signed and sent to the National Archives documents swearing that they were the duly authorized electors, which was not true. And now those people are in legal trouble. And he did it from several other states as well. Trump also tried to get state officials to do his bidding, summoning the leader of the House and Senate in, again, our state, in Michigan, to go to Washington to ask them to declare that there are irregularities in the election in Michigan in order to cast doubt on the outcome. Infamously, he called the Secretary of State of Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, to say, hey, I need you, come on, guys, I need you to just find me 11,780 votes. And that was recorded.
Yeah, which every honest person in an election does. Find me votes.
Find me votes.
After the election.
Yeah, and you can't, it's recorded. You can't say, oh, this guy, he's a rhino, he's out to get me. The truth is he's a Trump supporter. He voted for Trump both times, 2016 and 2020. And it's recorded for everybody to listen to. You can Google it and listen to it. So thankfully, Raffensperger refused to do that. Failing that, then, focus was put on elected officials, not in the states, but now in Washington, who would, he hoped, Trump and his people hoped, would on January 6th, when counting the electoral votes from each state, when that was happening, they would object to these leaders in Washington, object to the electors from some states, hope that the presiding officer of that electoral count on January 6th, none other than the Vice President of the United States, at that time Mike Pence, hoping that he would acquiesce and then it would go back to the states. Many of them swing states that have Republican legislatures. So now we're saying, hey, there's doubt about whether Trump lost Michigan, whether Biden won Michigan. Biden won Michigan by 154,000 votes. And so the hope was we send it back to Michigan to a Republican legislature, and it would be an absolute circus at the very best. I mean, think about it. Would Trump, under those circumstances, had that happened, would he have left the White House? Would he have left the White House in 2 weeks on Inauguration Day? I mean, as it is, having failed in these multiple attempts, thanks be to God, and I mean that very sincerely, thanks be to God he failed, because I shudder to think about what would have happened. But as it is, having failed, he slinked out of D.C. in the dead of night. And for the first time ever, you had an outgoing president refuse to attend the inauguration of his successor. So what if he had been successful on challenging the electoral votes? Would he have left? I'm dubious about whether he would have done that. I personally believe he would have refused to leave, and we'd have had chaos bordering on civil war, if not actual civil war. This week, we learned with certainty that the Department of Justice is looking into criminal liability of those in Trump's orbit for this attempt now to steal the elections, send fake electors to Washington, intimidate Congress with a violent mob on January 6th, knowing, as we now know, because of the work of the January 6th committee, that Trump knew that some of them were armed when he sent them to the Capitol. Now, I say that we've learned this with certainty because the truth is the 1-6 committee has been doing it, while it's been doing its work, there have been many criticizing the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, for not, in their minds, investigating Trump and his allies. But the truth of the matter is they have been investigating for over a year. I mean, they seized a guy named Roger Stone's phones over a year ago. Now, Stone is a guy, whenever there's mayhem, somewhere under a rock somewhere is Roger Stone. I'm telling you, going back to Richard Nixon, this is the guy, Roger Stone, who cut his teeth as a Republican operative doing dirty tricks for none other than the original dirty trickster, Richard Nixon.
It's just striking to me that a person comes into Washington claiming to drain the swamp, and this guy works for you.
This guy's one of your chief advisors, and yeah, exactly. And here's a guy, Roger Stone, who has on his back, tattooed on his back, this large image of Richard Nixon. That's how highly he thinks of Nixon. So he's always a player when there is mayhem. He was in the whole Russia thing too, a go-between between the Russians and WikiLeaks that then leaked this information that Russia had stolen from the Democrats and all the stuff that Mueller looked into. Stone was part of that. Stone lied. He was convicted. He's going to jail. Trump pardoned him. More about that later. So he's always a player when there's mayhem. And he was meeting with the Proud Boys. That's one of these groups, these kind of militia, paramilitary kinds of groups. He's meeting with them at the Willard Hotel in D.C. the day before the riot. On January the 5th, he's meeting with them. So no wonder the Department of Justice seized his phones. They're looking into Roger Stone and his activities. The Proud Boys, some of you may remember that in one of the 2020 presidential debates, President Trump was asked, hey, will you denounce these groups and their violence? And he goes, who are you talking about? And Biden says, Proud Boys. And he says, you may remember this, kind of infamous, Trump says, Proud Boys, stand back, and stand by.
Which, when I heard it come out of his mouth, I attributed it as the guy can't speak.
Yes, right.
But it was not that innocent.
They didn't take it that way. More importantly, they didn't take
there
it.
you go. Yeah,
they were texting each other and says, "Hey, the commander tells us to stand by."
Yeah,
they took it that way, and sure enough, they were standing by.
That's probably. I've watching all of this now. I may become too cynical because I'm like, well, maybe he meant something by that, but at the very least, it wasn't clear enough.
Then come 1/6, in December, he's saying, "Hey, we're going to have this January 6th thing. Be there. It will be wild," and they're taking this as we're standing by, be there, it'll be so. And then they show up and they do their thing, and Roger Stone is meeting with them, and it's all being investigated. So the Department of go ahead.
Sorry, I interject this too. I could see someone saying, come on, he's just trying to drum up support.
Yeah.
He's trying to get his base excited.
Yeah.
But if you're the smartest guy in the world, right? I mean, if you're really smart and claim to be, you ought to see something like that as a dangerous thing that should be avoided and guarded against.
Quite foreseeable.
Yeah.
Very foreseeable.
I mean, everybody was talking about this might happen.
And I will give it up for anybody who says what you said. I mean, I will. Okay, fair enough. So now, and this is what we'll get to at the end of our relatively short podcast today, is, okay, well then when it unravels, what do you do?
Right.
If your intentions were, honorable, and you just, it just got out of hand, and I didn't intend for it. When I said stand by, I didn't really mean it. I didn't think they would. And when I said it'll be wild, I didn't think anybody was. When I was giving the speech and I was saying you got to fight like Gehenna for your country, and when Rudy's getting up there and saying it's going to be trial by combat, I mean, none of us thought. And when I knew that they were armed, and I said, surely nobody's going to use these arms, and nobody's going to.
It gets more ridiculous.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. But okay, with all that, what did you do?
Right.
When it happened, when it all unraveled, and we'll get to that in a bit. So the Department of Justice has been doing a bottom-up, mostly investigation, which is the way these kinds of investigations go, and they've been doing it for a long time, and they are flipping people to the top. This week, it was revealed that 2 of Mike Pence's closest aides testified before a grand jury, and that during that grand jury testimony that they were asked about Trump himself and what he knew and what he was doing in the days before, after, and on January the 6th. So what we learned is that Trump and his minions are being criminally investigated for this.
Yeah, it really is scary how close we came, with this significant civil unrest that you mentioned.
Right.
The chaos of January 6th was bad enough, but it could have been much worse.
Absolutely.
And, so now Trump is flirting with another run for the office. We commented a little bit on that last week. How dangerous might that be?
I cannot overemphasize how dangerous a second Trump administration would be. And I am being just as straight as I can, friends. We need to pray it does not happen. I mean, here's what I mean. Just try to imagine. I mentioned to you earlier today that there's this thing called Schedule F, Google Schedule F. And you'll find that in November of 2020, after the election,
Sounds like something having to do with taxes, actually.
it does, and it's not that.
And if it's in relationship to former President Trump,
Yeah,
my mind even
this
goes
is
there.
true. It's not any of that. It's not taxes. It's not the IRS. It is like an executive order, as I understand it, in November of 2020, after the election, where Trump, with his presidential authority, says that you're going to make it easier to dismiss, to fire people in the civil service. I mean, this is the heart of the government. This is not elected officials. These are career civil servants. They take the civil service exam. They get a job. They might do this for the rest of their life, whatever it is, somewhere within the bowels of the huge government, and for many of us, too huge government, I admit. But this has become known. These people have become the enemy to many, with terms like the deep state and the administrative state. And so, but it's hard to, under current law, it's hard to get rid of them. So Trump is looking to make it easier to get rid of them and then replace them. Now, there's a debate to be had about the size of the government, to be sure, and how long these people should be around, and is it, do we need all of them, and all of that. I'm certainly fine with that. The concern I have is if he got elected again and he is actually free to fire people and put people in, not just in now political appointee positions, which every administration does, but these are the career people that go from one administration, Democrat or Republican, and they go to the next one.
These are the gears that keep everything working.
Exactly. If he's able to replace them, I mean, look at all of the levers he pulled with the power he had. This is more power to pull more levers. He's also a guy who doesn't forget anybody who he thinks crossed him. Nixon famously had an enemies list, and so does Trump. And if he has power, I'm very concerned about what he would do with that. He has business all over the world in foreign countries, and he's going to be in a position of power to curry favor with foreign governments that can help his business interests, which he is not above. He has no restraints because you can only serve 2 terms. A second term would be way more dangerous than a first term. In the first term, he at least had to think about keeping himself in check a bit in order to have the possibility of getting reelected. And he did plenty of stuff that was untoward and outside the lines. Even with those restraints, he would have zero restraints. And he would have no fear while he's president of prosecution because the Justice Department has this policy that you cannot prosecute a sitting president. You can prosecute them after they are president, like Trump is now, but not while they are president. So people have asked me, why do you have such an antipathy to Donald Trump? And it's never been about his policies, but it's about his person, which is unsavory for any Christian, but dangerous for any human. I'm just going to tell you straight, the reason I've always been so concerned about this man, and would be all the more concerned if he had the restraints removed in a second term because he didn't have to worry about reelection. He's capable of anything. I mean this just to straight. I believe he is capable of anything. And when I say anything, I mean anything. And he was willing to allow a riot to take place in our nation's capital, on the Capitol building, and send our legislators scurrying for their own safety. He was willing to do that. And what would he do in another term? I think he's capable of anything. In fact, what I should have done years ago is, instead of kind of dropping comments every now and then about, look, be aware of this, be concerned about this. This is not the kind of person we want to back as Christians. I was just trying to do that as words to the wise. and hoping it would have an effect. And thankfully for many people it did. But I also understand why for other people they kind of went, why is he just, throwing these bombs, on Trump? What I should have done, and I will do, if he really gets traction and he really does run again, I will take some time to just say, look, we got to talk about this. And we got to talk about who this man is. Because I knew who he was before he ran. And I knew his connections to Roy Cohn, C-O-H-N, look it up. Look up Roy Cohn and Donald Trump. Just look at and then Melania, his wife, and her modeling career and the kinds of modeling that she did, which I don't even want to talk about, okay? But that's who these people are. This is not just, this is an unsavory human being that I believe is capable. And so I should have done that. And as I say, if he pursues a nomination and it looks like he's going to get close to it, I will in the future.
Yeah, I was going to say, might be beneficial to have before he gets a nomination.
Well, we'll see. Let's see where it goes. Hopefully it's some of this is going to catch up and he's not going to be a factor, but we'll see.
So what we know about the investigation of the Capitol riot is that it was a multifaceted attempt to overturn the election, and it appears to be that the then president was orchestrating it. And except for a few brave souls in key positions, it may have just worked, and been very, very dangerous, more dangerous than it already was.
Right.
So we also know with certainty that it is now a criminal investigation getting closer to Trump. What else then? Before we end today, and I recommend it's going to be episode 31 of our podcast, where we dealt with this initially over a year ago. What else from that week do we need to know?
Okay. Well, here's what we know in the last several days. We know what we mentioned in last week's podcast, which is the Secret Service deleted texts from January 5th and 6th, which are key to knowing what Trump was saying and doing on those days. Now, that was last week. And now, just within the last 2 days, we learn that the texts of his Homeland Security director and the director's assistant were also deleted.
Wow. I was saying to you, I'm just a guy. Yeah. And if you texted me in the last 5 years, I've got it. And it's just because I might need to know what something was. But I can't imagine.
And it's not against the law for you to, if you don't want to keep them, you don't have to, but you do just because you might need them.
It takes no memory on my phone.
But there is a federal Retention Records Act that is a law of the land, and therefore failure to retain federal records is a crime. It's a crime. And it's prima facie evidence on the face of it of a cover-up. So as the Department of Justice looks into this, now, see, here's the difference. Trump does not have what he did in the Mueller investigation. He does not have personal immunity from prosecution while president, because he's not. He doesn't have the ability to keep people quiet by pardoning them, as he did for Michael Flynn and Paul Manafort and George Papadopoulos and the aforementioned Roger Stone and many others. But criminal cases take a very long time, and Trump is desperate to be president again before being prosecuted. So we'll see how the timing goes with that. But with all the details and in trying to keep straight the names and the dates and the events and what the House committee is doing versus what the Department of Justice is doing, you can really get to the gist of this just by knowing only one thing. And we said this on the podcast, episode 31, you said it is, that we did the very week of the riot. It has happened only a few days earlier. When we did that episode 31, the riot had occurred, and we said at that time that it was a lot of people showing up to protest what they falsely but genuinely believed was a stolen election. The vast majority, we said at the time, were peaceful, and they have every right to peaceful protest, even if you're protesting a lie. But we also said some clearly came ready for more than peaceful protest. And some of the peaceful folks undoubtedly got swept up in the emotion and unwittingly joined those who had more dangerous intentions. Now, and that's what we said then. In the meantime, nearly 900 rioters have been charged with crimes by the government. Hundreds have pleaded guilty, and others found guilty in court, including leaders of groups like the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, found guilty for, and this is the term, guilty of seditious conspiracy. Okay? So now those people some of them are being flipped about who were you involved with to carry out this sedition. But over 18 months ago, we didn't know all that was going to happen, and there's more to come. But we said then, and I say now, with all of the details, and it can get hard to keep it all straight, you need to know one thing that's still true. Trump did nothing to stop it for 3 hours once it started. That simply cannot be explained in a positive way at all by anyone. We've since learned that he gave his "We love you, you're very special to us, now go home in peace" speech at 4:17 on January the 6th. But we've since learned that he gave that speech only after it became clear that the riot had actually failed in its objective. So what we said then has held up well, we think, and we commend it to you.
All right. Well, that's it for this episode. We're going to link to that episode 31, and we recommend you take a look at it. We'll put it as the recommended video after this. We'll link to it just above, over right here, I think it is, if you're watching on YouTube. And we'll put it in the video description below as well. So thanks for watching. If you don't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the notification bell so you know when our new videos come out. We try to produce these every week on Saturdays at 2. We generally release them, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one. If you have a question you'd like us to consider, you can send that in to our email address, info@cbctrenton.com, or text it to us at 97000.